Good evening, everyone. I hope it's, well, I'm told it's warmer in Sydney than it has been for a while. And it's getting warmer here in South Australia too, which is lovely. It's been a long, cold and wet winter. So tonight we'll start with about 10 minutes of meditation. I'm not sure how much meditation others have done, but I can see enough people whom I met before who've meditated. So I won't give a guided meditation tonight. I'll just introduce the evening meditation, and then we can sit for about 10 minutes just to calm the mind and to relax into the room that we're sitting in. And if you want to, it would make sense to mute yourself so that if there's any sound coming from your room or your house, it won't disturb others. And you can also stop the video too, so that, I don't know, I stop mine because I don't want to be a distraction to other people. And if I need to scratch my nose, then I can do that without anybody knowing. Okay, so let's just find a way to sit comfortably on either our cushion or in our chair, with our back nice and straight, but not like a ramrod. Just sitting there straight, not leaning back too much because we may fall asleep. Not that there's anything wrong with falling asleep, but that's not what meditation is about. So we sit there with a nice straight back, our shoulders relaxed. Our eyes can be closed or open. Some people insist on the eyes being open and others don't. I think that is a choice. You can close your eyes very gently and sit there with your hands, either your left hand on top of your right hand and your thumbs touching, or your one hand on each thigh. Shoulders relaxed. Keep your nose in line with your abdomen. And just tuck your chin in a little. And allow a very gentle smile to appear on your lips, like the smile on a Buddha image. And just notice what it is, what happens in your face when you allow this smile to arise. Just pay attention to what happens to the muscles in the face when the smile arises. It's not a grin, it's just a very gentle smile. And just take in breathe in and out 3 times. Nice deep breaths. Relax completely. Bring your attention to your breathing in and your breathing out. And notice where you most readily experience your breath. Do you experience your breath in your nostrils? Or in the rising and the falling of your chest? Or in the expansion and contraction of your abdomen? Wherever you most readily experience your breath, keep your attention in that place. Breathing in, breathing out, paying attention to your in-breath and out-breath as best you can. And when you notice that your attention has left your breath, then very gently and without judgment of yourself, bring your attention back to the breath. You may have to do this many times. The important thing is when you become aware of the breath, of your attention having left the breath. The ultimate goal of meditation is to cultivate awareness. So when you pay attention to your breath and you notice that your attention has left your breath, that awareness is what you are seeking to cultivate. There are no mistakes here. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention on your in-breath and your out-breath. breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention on your in-breath and your out-breath. Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya. Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya. Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya. So good evening, everybody. Lovely to be back again. Sometimes these months seem to fly by, and then other times they seem to go slowly. So here we are again. On my screen, you'll see my name, Thay Thong Phap Nukunu. And Nukunu is the name of the nation of indigenous people who are the traditional owners of the land on which I lived, and they've lived here for a minimum of 60,000 years. And so I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I have a special relationship within my own heart towards this nation because my grandfather's family, from the beginning of this colony of South Australia, came up here and lived and stole the land from these people. So I want to acknowledge their rightful ownership of this land and to acknowledge my own sorrow at what my family did. Tonight, I'm going to continue, or I'm going to give the second Dharma talk in a series of 5 Dharma talks based on one of the 3 thoughts that come up in the Noble Eightfold Path under the title of right thought. It's called, this particular thought is called Nekama, which is translated as renunciation, but I also think of it simply as letting go, and mostly just letting go of the thought of I, me, and mine. The thought that there is this thing I call myself that is somehow solid, and that there are these things that belong to this I, me, I, that are mine. What's translated in Pali as atta, attaniya, I, me, and the things of I and me. So what I'm suggesting is that this letting go is ultimately letting go of the harmful thought that there is a solid and permanent self that has possession of not only things in the world, but possession of itself, which we know is not true. We can't ever say to our bodies when they get close to death, you're mine, so I'm telling you not to die. That doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't work anyway. So what I'm focusing on really is the letting go of this attachment to the notion of I and me and mine. And the way I'm doing that is by looking back at my life when I was a young person at the age of 16, and I was a practicing Christian, and I had felt called to the life of a monk. I wanted to be a monk since I was 16, and I realized that the life of being a monk involved letting go of many things, giving up many things, renouncing many things. And that renunciation, that letting go, was made clear to me from 5 readings from the Gospel according to St. Matthew. And these readings I read when I was 16 years of age, which is now a long time ago. And what I'm actually sharing with you is not just those readings and what they meant to me at that time, but how those ideas of letting go have grown and developed over my lifetime, and especially within the context of being a Buddhist and a Buddhist monk. There's still the idea of renunciation or letting go is still primary for me in my thinking. I'm not necessarily very good at it, but it's my goal in life to free myself of the thought of I, me, and mine through renunciation, through letting go. And like I say, I'm not necessarily very good at it. I'm just telling you what I think and what I aspire to. Now, tonight's talk is has worried me a little bit because it seems to me to be quite long. So if we get to the point where you can't take in any more, I would really appreciate it if you told me so. Please be honest with me. I won't be offended at all. In fact, I'd be very sorry if you sat through this whole talk and thought, what is that man on about? I'd rather you tell me that you've heard enough and can we please stop now and come back to it at another time. But we'll do our best with it. But if you do want me to stop, please speak up and say so. I would appreciate that. So the text from Matthew's Gospel tonight that I wanted to focus on is from the 8th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, verses 18 to 20. And this is what it says. Now, when Jesus saw great crowds around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And a scribe came up and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay down his head." And I also want to share with you a reading from a Chinese Ch'an master called Huang Po. Some of you may have heard of Huang Po, but this is a section of his work called Transmission of Mind, and it's from the 18th section of that teaching of Huang Po. Huang Po was a 9th century master of the jhana or meditation tradition brought to China by Bodhidharma. Jhana has been transliterated into Chan in Chinese, Sun in Korean, Tien into Vietnamese, and Zen into Japanese. So when you hear the word Zen, which is the word we hear mostly, it just means meditation, along with Chan and Sun and Tien. And this is what Huang Po said. If an ordinary person, when she or he is about to die, could only see the 5 elements of consciousness as empty, the 4 physical elements as not constituting an I, the real mind as formless and neither coming nor going, his or her nature as something neither commencing at birth nor perishing at death, but as whole and motionless in its very depths, his or her mind and environmental objects as one. If he could really accomplish this, he would receive enlightenment in a flash. He would no longer be entangled by the triple world. He would be a world transcender. He would be without even the faintest tendency towards rebirth. If he should behold the glorious sight of all the Buddhas coming to welcome him, surrounded by every kind of gorgeous manifestation, he would feel no desire to approach them. If he should behold all sorts of horrific forms surrounding him, he would experience no terror. He would just be himself, oblivious of conceptual thought and one with the Absolute. He would have attained the state of unconditioned being. This, then, is the fundamental practice, the fundamental principle. So the reading from Matthew's Gospel was the second reading that impressed itself on me so deeply at the age of 16 and called me into renunciation, the letting go of the desire for a permanent home. Unlike the foxes and the birds, Jesus didn't have a home, and I didn't want one either. At 16, this kind of renunciation was not hard to imagine, as I didn't have a home of my own anyway. Further, it fitted into a very romantic view of life, such as the life led by Jesus and by St. Francis of Assisi. And I am by nature a romantic, so I was pretty much caught up in those romantic thoughts. Jesus was a wandering rabbi, a guru, followed by his students. He was not unlike the samanas of India, the homeless wanderers, those gone forth to claim their true home within their own hearts and minds. They belonged in no one place, and paradoxically, they belonged everywhere. They had claimed a great freedom. They had made themselves thoroughly available to others. We might also say that in this availability to others, they had made themselves bodhisattvas, awakening beings striving to support others in their journeys towards inward and outward freedom. Such a one was Jesus, who did not settle in any one place, manifesting wherever he was needed. This is the understanding of the renunciation of home that inspired me as a 16-year-old. Like the samanas of India, including the Buddha, Jesus was fearless, depending solely on the generosity of others. Like the Buddha, Jesus was moved deeply by the force of his own character, the authenticity of his own realizations and consequent teachings, founded in the depth of his own practice. Like the Buddha, his aim was to teach a liberating message to the ordinary folk of the time. This homelessness, this fearlessness, this freedom, this availability was what he called the scribe to, the person who wanted to follow him wherever he went. This was how I understood my vocation at 16. The text does not say whether the scribe followed him or not. It just laid down the conditions of discipleship: homelessness, trust, and journey. I too felt the call to live out the vocation of homelessness. Now, in the Pali and Sanskrit languages of Buddhism, there is a word in Pali, pabhaja, or in Sanskrit, pavraja. It means going forth from home to the homeless life of the bhikkhu or the bhikkhuni, the one who lives on the alms offered by householders. And interestingly enough, the root of the word bhikkhu and bhikkhuni is bhik, which is etymologically related to the English word beg. So a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni is one who lives on what they receive from householders by begging, by going seeking alms. Going forth into the homeless life is parallel to the call of Jesus to the scribe, and in 1968, the call to me. Pabhaja or pavraja has become the name for the ceremony which occurs when a man or a woman becomes a shramanera or a shramaneri, a novice. Going into homelessness in Buddhism is a voluntary act of renunciation of the householder's life, with all of its apparent consolations and comforts. This act of renunciation is founded in the second of the Noble Eightfold Path, called right thought. Right thought follows on from right understanding, which is the first of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right understanding includes an insight into the three things that characterize existence: impermanence or anicca, including the impermanence of this event I call I, me, mine, anatta. And the third characteristic of existence is the suffering or dukkha that comes when we want everything, including ourselves, to remain permanent, when we demand of life a solid, permanent home or refuge. The first of these three right thoughts is called nekkhamma, or renunciation, or letting go. This renunciation is not based on a moralistic opposition to the objects of desire. We are not renouncing a home because a home is bad. It is based on the futility of pursuing things that change, that are transient, that which will ultimately bring suffering. What underlies the decision to go forth into homelessness is the realization of impermanence and the futility of holding on to that which will only bring disappointment. But it is also a choice to do all that has to be done in order to take the path to the treasure that I spoke of last time. In both Buddhism and Christianity, there are examples of women and men who, on hearing the gospel or the Dharma, choose a solitary and itinerant life. For example, within the Sangha of Thailand, there are what's called the Tudong Monks, those monastics who do not remain within a temple or a monastery, but who live on the road, sheltering in the forest. Indeed, for much of the early history of the Buddhist Sangha, the monastics lived this kind of life. They came to live in one place during the rainy season in order to avoid wrecking the rice paddies by walking in them and causing problems for farmers. This is the origin of the 3 months rains retreat season, which continues to be practiced by both Theravada and Mahayana monastics. Within Christianity, the monastic life founded by St. Anthony was characterized by solitary monastics living very simply in the deserts of Egypt. In antiquity and the Middle Ages, there were what St. Benedict, the founder of monasticism in Western Europe, called gyrovagues. And I always feel like he talked about these people who wandered by themselves. I think he always talked about them rather disparagingly. He didn't really trust their journey. They were wandering religious. Perhaps one of the more famous mendicants or wanderers of the Middle Ages, friars not attached to a friary, is Friar Tuck from the legend of Robin Hood, who never had a home of his own, who hung out with Robin Hood and his men. The homeless are present in both the monastics, in the settled monasteries and in the communities of wanderers, because what characterized both was the fact that they never owned property. They were homeless. Owning property never attracted me, and so the renunciation of home, neither having a nest or a hole to shelter in of my own, was both natural and attractive. How are we going? Does anybody need to ask a question or anything? Okay, we'll keep going. But the word homelessness has come to mean something else in our world. And while not necessarily associated with the spiritual journey and the religious life, it introduces the matter of fear into our human experience. Early in 2015, I received a text message from elders who were the property managers of my tiny flat in Claremont in Tasmania, saying that they were coming to do a building inspection. Now, I thought to myself that they would most likely be doing this because the owner wants to put it on the market, and that actually turned out to be the case, though the owner eventually changed their mind. My first response to this was one of dismay and fear. Homeless again, I thought. What lay ahead was again finding a new home for both my little dog lady and for me. The need to pack everything up again, to move it and unpack it, with cleaning involved at both ends. I'm sure you know the nightmare that comes with moving house. Then, of course, there is the need to get to know a new suburb, just as Claremont had become familiar to me and comfortable. The reaction of fear that I experienced, however, has much deeper roots. My family is a working class family from Port Adelaide. My great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my parents knew between them 2 depressions and 2 world wars. They weren't poverty-stricken, but my grandfather did lose his home in the early 1930s and had to move from a brick house to a corrugated iron house, which his mother-in-law owned. In everybody's mind were memories of the many people who lost their homes in the Depression due to bank foreclosures and had to live in tent settlements on the River Torrens. To Port Adelaide people, homelessness and poverty were very real and very frightening things. This fear of poverty and homelessness has even deeper roots in the collective memory of working class people. In the 19th century and the early 20th century, those who were impoverished due to changing circumstances, including old age, were either put into the workhouse or voluntarily put themselves into it. In Scotland and in Adelaide, the workhouse was called the poorhouse. And I remember even as a child, the poorhouse was a threat to those who couldn't handle their money well. My mum used to say of one of our neighbours, she'll end up in the poorhouse because she couldn't manage her money. My mother, on the other hand, was an expert manager of money, driven largely by her fear of poverty and this very same poorhouse. Homelessness is still with us, and with it now are associated other conditions such as youth, drugs, alcohol, mental illness, vulnerability, and great shame. There is a stronger emphasis now on supporting people to recover their dignity along with better living conditions, but nevertheless, homelessness is not to be embraced. It also has to be said that the homelessness that so many people around the world are forced into is structurally based, the result of economic and political systems giving rise to the same structural violence. And all over the world now are a vast number of refugees. These people are refugees from poverty, war, famine, communal and state violence, people who are simply longing for freedom. Refugees are homeless and stateless people, and we know of them now best as asylum seekers. They put themselves at extreme risk and great expense to get to Australia, where they hope there will be safety, freedom, and a chance to make a living for themselves and their families. And these are all basic human needs: safety, shelter, work, food, and the like. But at the moment, Australia is not particularly hospitable. In fact, over the last 16 or so years, Australia has rendered asylum seekers, including children, more vulnerable. When we think of homelessness, all of this underpins our fears. And of course, we have had the long story of the Sri Lankan family from Biloela and the great struggle that even the welcoming people of Biloela had to put forward to get that family back. So Australia has not been particularly kind of late to asylum seekers. But there is a second kind of homelessness, and it's known well to those of us who work as chaplains and contemplative care workers. When a hospital chaplain encounters a very ill patient or someone who is dying, they encounter somebody who is facing the fact that in some sense their body is failing them. Now, of course, sickness and death were always on the agenda, but we don't like to think about that. We imagine our bodies as a permanent refuge rather than a temporary shelter. When the time comes, the contemplative care worker or the chaplain encounters grief, anger, a sense of deep loss, pain and fear, in a word, suffering. The body is not our home. In the end, we are rendered homeless. The university chaplain encounters students who have moved to the city from rural areas or other countries such as the People's Republic of China, Malaysia, or India. For all of them, they are not home, and they have in some sense to start all over again as young adults to rebuild their lives. Now, ultimately, this may be a big adventure, but in the moment there is missing family, a landscape, mother's cooking, their dog. And there is a new environment, strange and friendless, to deal with. They may never return permanently to their own hometown. And when they do return to Singapore or Malaysia, for example, they have changed as a result of their stay here and their study. They may never fit back into home in the same way they did before they came here. Home is built on shifting sands. The chaplain may just need to sit with the student in this pain. A chaplain to the prison encounters people who have made serious mistakes and are being punished for them. They are taken out of their familiar settings and placed in what one Buddhist chaplain I know calls a toxic environment. They have no ongoing connection with or responsibility for their children, their parents, or their partners. They lose all of the power over the ordinary details of their lives, including many rights that other citizens take for granted. They also enter new environments, deliberately not homes, that are full of mistrust and suspicion and violence of many kinds. And when it is all over, they will never lose what we once called the convict stain. The chaplain accompanies the inmate into another form of homelessness. And finally, there is the pastoral care worker active in the field of aged care. It is in this field of ministry that the pastoral care worker will encounter face-to-face the suffering associated with old age, sickness, and death. People have been removed from their original home to their new home, a place full of strangers with whom they would not necessarily associate in their ordinary life. The routine that now governs their lives is imposed upon them. They no longer cook the food they eat, it's mass-produced. Their possessions and precious objects from a former life may well be damaged or stolen. They may not see old friends and family very often, if ever, and they now live in a parallel universe, far removed from the neighborhood, church, and so forth that made up their lives previously. And for many, they must make all of these adjustments with an ailing body or a dementing mind, or both. Neither environment, body, or mind is a true refuge, a true home for them, no matter how good or otherwise a job the aged care facility does for them. The grief and loss is tremendous, and this is what the contemplative care worker, if there is one, must bear witness to and help alleviate. Now, this homelessness that I'm talking about is not a pretty picture, or at least not the way I've presented it. While indeed there are many heroic people involved in compassionate action in these situations, each example of a contemplative care setting points to the reality that ultimately there is nowhere in the external world we can call home. The question arises then, is there a true refuge for us? Is there somewhere we can call home? Does anybody have anything they'd like to say now? Or any question you'd like to ask before I go on to where may a true refuge be found? Let me just pour myself some tea here so that I don't lose my voice.
So feel free to unmute yourself if you want to say something. We are too indulged with your stories, Thay.
Okay. Okay, so let's go on to where may a true refuge be found. And we'll return to Huang Po and the answer to the question of where a true refuge may be found. You remember Huang Po is the Chinese Ch'an Master that I mentioned before. In the line in his text, to see the 5 elements of consciousness as empty or void, the 4 physical elements as not constituting an I, Huang Po is restating a fundamental teaching of the Buddha, and one which is explicated really beautifully by the Thai Theravadan master, Venerable Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. The same kind of thing. And actually, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu in his book called The Heartwood of the Bodhi Tree goes on to talk about how much he appreciated the Zen masters, especially Huang Po, with this notion of the voidness of the body and the voidness of the mind, the emptiness of these two things. The 5 elements of consciousness refers to the 5 aggregates or skandhas of form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. I'm trusting that you've had a look at those things before. Briefly, form refers to the corporeal aggregate, the bodily aggregate of the psychophysical phenomenon, who is conveniently designated as me. The 4 physical elements of which form comprises are earth or solidity, water or fluidity, fire or heat, and air. The remaining 4 skandhas are non-material mental aggregates. Perception refers to the aspect of mind that names an object of understanding, of knowledge. Feeling refers to the experience of wanting or not wanting, or an experience of neutrality towards an object of perception. Mental formations refer to memory, volitional capacity, or the capacity of the will, and habit patterns. It is also out of this particular skandha that karma is generated. Karma is the result, really, of our will, our memory, and our habit patterns. The aggregate of consciousness refers or consists of the 6 consciousnesses that arise from contact between eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and their respective objects. So this is everything that makes up our human experience. It's everything that, without any of it, we cannot be alive. We cannot be a fully living being. And Huang Po points to these phenomena as empty. They are impermanent and not self-existent. They are interdependent with other impermanent causes and conditions. You cannot have the mental factors without the physical factor of form. Neither can you have a full and living sentient being without the mental factors. Further, the physical factor or aggregate can only exist as a result of having borrowed the elements from the ever-changing world around us. For as long as we hold on to these 5 aggregates and form elements as permanent, self-existent, a potential refuge or home, we will suffer, especially as death approaches. If we see them as empty of solidity and separateness, we will approach both life and death with equanimity, neither attracted to the gorgeous nor averse to the horrific forms surrounding us. But Huang Po goes further. He points from a Buddhist perspective to the true refuge for us when that which is empty and impermanent begins to fail us. He points to what has no exact name because it is beyond conceptual thought. For the sake of communication in the realm of the relative world, this level of reality is called our Buddha nature, our true mind, the face we had before we were conceived, emptiness, and many other names besides. The capacity to reside with what is absolutely true about our existence is the purpose of our meditative practice. To abandon what is impermanent, such as conceptual thinking and transient feelings, and coming back always to that great silence in the gaps between the arising and falling away of conceptual thought. We come back to ourselves, just ourselves, free of categories and dualities, particularly the primary duality of I, me, mine, over and against other. When in our practice, in our lives, we encounter and abide with the formless real mind, which neither comes nor goes, with our nature as something neither commencing at birth nor perishing at death, but as whole and motionless in its very depths, when mind and environmental objects are one, this is enlightenment, an end to the suffering that arises out of clinging to dualistic concepts, including the I, me, mine thought. Now, I didn't read this work of Huang Po until about 2015. And I thought to myself, well, I don't really think I've got the right to call myself a Zen monk because I don't really understand Zen. And sometimes a lot of the koans and that just drive me nuts. I can't understand them at all and I get really irritated by them. But when I read this particular section of Huang Po's teaching, I found myself really inspired, and I found that it nurtures my aspiration to attain ultimate freedom. Huang Po says it so clearly and so plainly and so beautifully. For me personally, the context in which this happens is the context of deliberately choosing homelessness in the form of the monk's life. Many years ago, when a partner of mine left me for another man, I suffered greatly. It was this experience that led me more deeply into the Buddha Dharma. A friend of mine at the time advised me to put roots down into my own heart. I never forgot this advice, which I think is the same advice as that given by Huang Po. Over the years of my monastic life since the beginning of 2004, that has formed a primary aspiration, a way of articulating my monastic practice, to put roots down in my own heart. Now that could sound to many people like a whole pile of Zen or Buddhist gobbledygook, but we do have a way of translating his teaching into the suffering world of homelessness. There is one very serious question that remains. How do I translate this challenging insight from Buddhism, from Huang Po, into the world of suffering that I have encountered as a pastoral care worker, a chaplain, a contemplative care worker, for example, or a brother? Do I suggest to an old, demented lady, a person with pancreatic cancer, a homesick 19-year-old, or a prisoner, that the solution to their suffering is to abide with your Buddha nature, your true mind, and to let go of conceptual thoughts as you notice them arising in your meditation practice and your life? No, I don't think that's going to be helpful at all. In fact, I think it's quite an insult to tell somebody exactly what they have to do in those terms in order to deal with their suffering. One possible response that I love particularly, and it's a pastoral response made by the Buddha, is the story of Kisagotami. And I'm sure you know the story of Kisagotami. In this story, the Buddha provides the suffering person with something practical to do that enables them to see through their suffering to the truth of things as they are. In this case, it was to enable Kisagotami to see that we are all in a very similar boat. Life did not single Kisagotami out for suffering as a result of her baby dying. And the Buddha does not say to Kisagotami, "Pull your socks up, Kisagotami girl," nor does the Bhagwan say, "Thou shalt not love or be attached." He looked upon Kisagotami with eyes of great compassion and provided her with the means to recognize the roots of her suffering and the opportunity to learn from it and to transform it. Not only was the Buddha fully awakened and have complete compassion, but he's also had the skillful means to help Kisagotami see the truth of what Huang Po and Jesus were teaching. So my question to you for reflection tonight is this: and I might have a completely wrong question, and I'm quite happy for you to change it around. How might you translate this insight of the Buddha, of Jesus and Huang Po into homelessness, into a call that offers confidence, hope, and joy to ourselves and to other people? How can you make sense of life for yourself and other people in a way that gives them confidence and joy and hope in themselves? That's the question. And I would appreciate some help with a response.
Is there anyone who would like to express your view on this?
I mean, I can relate to it, you know, because I'm getting older now, and you know, I find that, you know, like everything's changing for me as I get older. I don't think I'll need to explain that to you, but I've got no answers for the question you ask. I'm sorry. Yeah.
How do you, is that you, Thay? Because I
No,
can't.
June.
Oh, June.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I recognised your voice, June, from last time, and I thought, oh, that must be Thay, but it's
Yeah, no, it's June, yes.
okay, June.
Yes.
You were the one who went out to see whether it was still raining for me last time.
Did I?
I think so. So how do you personally kind of live with the reality of aging in relation to your understanding of what the Buddha teaches?
It's very hard. The adjustment is very hard, and I don't really have no answers. I just keep on. I just struggle on. I just do the best I can, I guess, as we all do. Yeah, just keep on. You just have to keep on adapting. But I got no answers to your question. I wish you had some.
Well, I think what you've just said is your answer to the question. You keep on adapting, and you're able to keep on adapting. You keep being able to adapt. Gosh, yeah. Because nothing stays the same. If there was something permanent, you wouldn't need to adapt, or you wouldn't be able to. But you can adapt because nothing stays the same. Everything is impermanent.
That's right.
So your adaptation is your practice.
Okay.
It doesn't mean to say that's easy. It's not at all easy. I don't think anything on the spiritual path is easy at all. And I wouldn't go around pretending it. And I'm not this kind of person who would say, oh, well, you're finding it difficult because you're not practicing properly. I think that's really rude and awful. But the fact that you're open to adapting is, I think, your answer to the question.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not sure if you believe me or not.
I'll accept that for now. It's the best answer I've got. So
one day you can tell me whether it's working out for you.
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, June, we don't have any choice but to adapt.
That's right.
We don't have a choice other than to adapt, other than to roll with the punches, other than to move with the flow of things. We don't have a choice.
That's right.
You can't change it. You can't make it into something it's not.
No.
So if you roll with the punches and you're courageous about that, and you keep on keeping on rolling with the punches, that's your practice.
It is just keeping on.
Right.
Not easy.
Not easy, but I think it's not easy at all. And it's not easy for any of us.
No.
I think that, I know this sounds like I'm a born-again Buddhist, and I am a born-again Buddhist, but I think that's why the Buddha, or that's why the tradition has come up with the 3 refuges. There is Buddha, the Buddha within us, as well as this historical Buddha. There's the Buddha within us, the one who seeks the ultimate good for ourselves and others. There's the teachings of the Buddha that we have access to. But I think that the other thing that we have access to, or we ought to, is the Sangha, the community of people to whom we can talk about these things, with whom we can share these things, from whom we can gain some support. And those are the 3 refuges. So I don't know what access you have to a Sangha. And I don't just mean a Zoom Sangha, I mean a living Sangha.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
And I don't think they have to be Buddhists either. And I have a very diffuse Sangha. I live with a very old friend who happens to be an Anglican priest and an Anglican nun at the same time. And we support one another. When we get really fed up with life or we get sick, we talk about it with each other. She talks about it from a Christian point of view, and I understand that because I grew up in the church, but I also talk about it from a Buddhist point of view. Our Sangha doesn't just have to be the people that we meditate with. The Sangha is the entire universe, really. And if you've got people in your life that you can share this with and whinge to, I think lots of people say, oh, you shouldn't complain, but I don't think that's true either. I think there's a perfect place for complaining and saying how challenging this all is, how difficult it all is.
Well, what I find too is difficult is the fact that I seem to be just about older than everybody I know.
What did you do to deserve that, June?
We're going there, June. We are approaching there too.
Say that again?
All of us are approaching there too.
That's
I mean,
right.
we are going the same way. You're not
Yes.
the only one. It's just that you're going a bit faster than us.
Yes.
At an earlier start than many of us.
Yeah.
Ah, yes, yeah. Good way of putting it, an earlier start. Yeah.
How old are you?
But sometimes, I don't know, like, okay, if you look beyond this form, like sometimes, especially say if you go for a reunion or something, if you look at other people's reunion, right? So when you look at them, and then sometimes you see like the the liveliness of them, like when they were young. I mean, like when all these kind of oldies, they get together like a reunion, and then you just think of them as if they probably are the same. The essence of them or their Buddha nature was the same, like they were younger. When sometimes when I look at people in a reunion, and then it's beyond time and space. What I mean is, like, you can look at them as like their form is older, but you can also see that liveliness. I bet that they behave the same when they were little. So there is something in them that is beyond the form. That's how I feel. If you can look beyond the form, if you talk to someone, like when I talk to June, if I can still feel I bet if you talk to your old friends together, and then you still behave the same when you were little, isn't it? So there is something in there is still the same.
Yes.
I think that Huang Po that's what Huang Po is talking about. That the notion of old age is just an idea. I mean, there are physical realities and even but it's also just an idea. And you hear people say, oh, old age is just an idea, it's just a notion. I'm not really any older inside than I've ever been.
Yeah.
There's something I want to recommend to everybody, and that is a program on the ABC that's been on the last 4 weeks, that's connected teenagers with older people.
Ah, yes, yes.
And it's
Good
that
idea. Mm.
program, you know, these young people have views of older people, and the older people have views of younger people. And after 4 weeks of being together and kind of falling in love with each other, they change their views altogether, and it revivifies them. They, you know, especially the older people, they've got much more energy and interest in life than they had before they hung out with young teenagers. And the young teenagers have a lot more self-confidence and understanding of older people. You know, there's that whole notion that's come up with intergenerational kind of connection that I think is really worth investigating. It's full of understanding and love. And if you haven't watched that show on the ABC, I really recommend it. It's
Yeah, I haven't watched it. I know of it though. Yeah.
And then there was the earlier one where the older people connected with very young children.
Oh yes, the little ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's also very beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
Yes.
Right.
Say, it's about my practice. For many years now, I follow one practice. My meditation is not very good with age. I'm over 80 now. But Nekama taught me one very important thing. Do not blame the trigger. I attended most of her courses, and from each course I took home this sentence: do not blame the trigger. Life is painful, but we blame the wife, Mr. Morrison, the weather, you name it. We have millions of things to blame for our suffering, but I wake up in the morning, something wrong, or my wife tells me off, I'm not feeling 100%. I say, remember what Aya said, do not blame the trigger. And for many, many years now, I follow this. And then I realized that there's no real refuge on earth in our bodily form, in our mental state. So it changed me completely. I realized that the only refuge I can have is inside my heart, to become a better human being. And when they hurt me, I just smile and do not blame the trigger. So the real refuge is inside us. Like maybe the Buddha said once that there's no Buddha outside the heart, and there's no heart outside the Buddha. I don't know who said that, but it's 100% true. So the refuge, we have to find our refuge. Otherwise, our death will be very painful. But realizing, realizing that the underlying law of nature, of existence, is pain. If you keep blaming the trigger, what brings your misery and suffering, then you won't realize this truth, that the underlying law of nature is pain, because it's not life, it's the neighbors, it's the partner, it's Mr. Morrison or whoever. You know? So I found this teaching sort of liberating. And I have to concentrate, I'm not selfish, but on my behavior, my thoughts, that whatever happens, I must have a good heart, must have love, forgiveness. And I'm so happy. For 1 year now, I'm taking part in a Bible study. I never had that because I grown up in a communist system. and I hardly knew anything about the Bible and Jesus Christ, and always gave me great joy and happiness to find that Jesus Christ taught the same thing as the Buddha. But people complicate it with the Bible, you know, Old Testament, etc., etc. So even this helps me to find a home, some refuge in my heart. It's not easy to reach, but it took me a lot of suffering to get here. In 1954, River Danube took our house away. We ended up with nothing, only the clothes on us. We built a house, and then the communists, the government, took away our small bakery. We ended up with nothing again. 1965, I came to Sydney. I had $1 US, and my shoe was one size smaller. And walking in it, my toe started bleeding because it was too small. So I started from nothing, three times actually. Yeah. So it was a hard life, but when I met the Buddha's teaching, I was so lucky that it gave me a home and a refuge. And ever since then, I feel I have a refuge in the Dhamma and in the Sangha too, because I had the best teachers in the world going back to 1968. Mrs. Jackson, and then Rakantipalo, and then Ayakema, and you, and all the Buddhist monks who give me the Dhamma, the teaching. So to find a refuge, it's quite easy, but you have to work for it, and you have to find it in yourself. So thanks for listening to me. I better keep my mouth shut now.
And I really appreciate, Frank, what you said about there is no Buddha outside the heart. There
No.
is no heart outside the Buddha, which means everything is the Buddha.
Yes, yes.
Everything is Buddha. So that's our refuge.
Yes.
That's our true home. Thank you, Frank.
I thank you.
Anyone else?
I'd like to chip in a little. I listened to Thich Nhat Hanh quite a bit, and he had to leave his home of Vietnam and suffered because he could never return. So he says that wherever you are in the present is your home. So we have no power over what's going to happen in the future. So we just live day by day, living in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was listening to the radio this morning. There was an Australian lady who was jailed in Iran for a couple of years. And she didn't expect to be released, even though there were trumped up charges. So she said, I just had to come to the conclusion, well, this is going to be my home for the next 10 years.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So wherever you are, at the present is your home.
Yes. Can I just say to you that I'm having a similar experience. I really would love to be able to go back to Vietnam and stay in the monastery I was ordained in. But I have two small dogs whom I'm committed to, and I'm serious about my commitment. I love them very much, and they love me, and I'm not leaving them or abandoning them until they've passed away, and that could be another 6 years. So I have to say to myself regularly, that right here, right now is where is my home with them. When they've gone, then I can make other choices. But I'm not abandoning them, because that would be morally wrong from my point of view. So I completely agree with what you say, that wherever we are right here and right now is home. And that may not necessarily be easy, but what is? You know, what is it? June's life is not easy. My life's not easy. Your life. But we have this great blessing of being fully in the present, being home, right where we are now. Beautiful thought, Bill. Thank you.
Yeah. So coming to the end of our talk, and thank you, Thay, for your lovely teaching about this renunciation and the teaching of the Buddha. Forever grateful for your support to the community. So for those who wish to provide dana to the teachers, please let us know or indicate in the details if you are making an online donation, which I will put the link in the chat in case if you want to support. And also, I would like to let everyone know that Thay is coming to Sydney next month, and we are going to have a Dana Day at the Buddhist Library. In case if you can make yourself available on that day. It's a Sunday and it's daytime, 10 o'clock. So if possible, if you want to come to the Buddhist Library, they will be very happy to see you. So that is on the 23rd of October, Sunday. Okay, so hopefully some of you can make it to this Dana Day and to see Thay.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, they will only be here for about a week, so it's making this day for us. So looking forward to that.
Lovely.
With that, Thay, would you like to give a blessing or something?
I dedicate the merit.
Mm.
May the wholesome energy that we have generated here tonight and at any other time be for the benefit of all living beings. May all living beings be well and happy. May all living beings be free from suffering. May all living beings know peace and joy and the causes of peace and joy. And may we all continue together to walk the Buddha's path of truth and love. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much,
Lovely.
everyone. Thank you,
Thank
Thay.
you.